Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Which of the statements, if any, by NZIER Chief Economist Shamubeel Eaqub does he agree with the most? That interest rate rises will punish the provinces, that one of the biggest issues of this generation is the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, or that the gaps opening up in New Zealand are really big across geographical, race and education lines.
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with those statements. I do agree with other statements made by the same commentator when he said, quote, "It reeks of xenophobia, poor policy making, a populist knee-jerk reaction and, quote, sloppy." And that was Shamubeel Eaqub talking about Labor's housing policies.
Very sloppy, David.
Order. Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Is the Minister aware that in the past 5 years, there are 7,800 fewer people employed in the Waikato? There's been a loss of 7,300 in Manawatu Wanganui, 2,100 in Wellington, and there are 6,200 fewer people employed in Southland. Or is he so out of touch that he doesn't know what's going on outside of Auckland and Christchurch?
Well, Mr. Speaker, no, I disagree with that. And the member's so out of touch he can't remember there was a thing called the global financial crisis. So when he compares numbers prior to the biggest recession in 30 years with the recovery afterwards, then of course he's going to find that in some respects some numbers have still yet to improve. But in an economy that produced 84,000 new jobs over the last year, that has closed up those gaps very considerably and probably faster than people expected.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Given that 2/3 of GDP growth is coming from construction activity, which makes GDP growth other than construction closer to 1% than 3%, what is his plan to boost economic growth, aside from another earthquake?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am aware of the numbers around housing, and it is slightly ironic that the Members' Party has spent all year castigating the government for not building enough houses, and now that they are being built, apparently it's bad for the economy. And saying that we shouldn't count the benefits of construction is a bit like saying, well, if you take out the tries the All Blacks scored, they didn't actually win the game.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Is he really so out of touch with New Zealanders that he denies inequality is rising when home ownership rates are at the lowest in 50 years and dropping, and child poverty is rising?
Yes, they are.
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I think the House has discussed before, most measures of income inequality in New Zealand show that it's not getting worse. It's simply not the case that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And when the member talks about inequality of ownership of assets, then I would hope that his party will see its way to supporting the government's program to free up the supply of housing, because a fast-rising housing market is likely to drive inequality in the ownership of assets, because it favours those in the market as against those who are out of it. In that respect, we agree on the objective, that is a slower rising housing market, and it's a shame we haven't been able to agree on the tools, because the government's got good tools for addressing that driver of asset ownership.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Does the income inequality figure that he just referred to exclude capital gains?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the income inequality measure that I referred to isn't one measure, actually, it's a number of them, and they're all set out in the document originally commissioned by the previous Labor government, who thought they were going to use it as a political tool in opposition to demonstrate that inequality was getting worse. But actually, it doesn't demonstrate that. Any measure of income inequality shows it's flat and vaguely falling. With respect to capital gains,
point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
It was a very simple question. It's already been quite a long answer.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but the member just rose to his feet as the minister was about to address the portion about the capital gain, and I'd like to hear that answer. Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I understand that measure is aimed at income measures, not capital measures, and I can't actually tell him whether it excludes capital gains, but probably does.
Supplementary question to Ururoa Flavell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, does he agree with Professor Jonathan Boston, co-author of Child Poverty in New Zealand, who suggests that the poorest Kiwi children are now no better off than some children in the slums of India? And what steps can be taken towards introducing a living wage to address the immediate impacts of income deprivation in too many New Zealand families?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I certainly disagree with Dr Jonathan Boston's comments, and I think it discredits the campaign that he's been part of. If his advice to New Zealand politicians is copy conditions in India, because children are Indian slums, because children are better off, then we certainly feel free to reject that advice. Secondly, can I acknowledge the Māori Party's efforts over recent years? They've lobbied hard to increase the minimum wage to the kind of levels that the living wage has been set at. But we just don't agree with it going that high. We think it would destroy too many jobs, but we do acknowledge the intent of the Māori Party to help those who are on the lowest incomes.
That's right. Good answer.
Question number 6, Kevin Haig.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Development.